My name is Cassidy, I'm 26F, and I want to share the story of how I met the man I thought I'd spend forever with and how it all began before it fell apart. I hope that by telling this, maybe someone out there will relate, or maybe it'll help someone avoid the heartbreak I ended up with. Before I dive in, I'd love for you to comment where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always think it's amazing how stories connect us across places and moments. I met Jonah 3 years ago on a late spring afternoon in downtown Denver. I remember the exact day because it was one of those first truly warm days after a long, dreary winter. The kind of day where you don't need a jacket and the sun feels like it's kissing your skin after months of hiding. I'd been dragging myself to one of those after-work networking mixers that my friend had convinced me to attend. You know the type where you pretend to care about exchanging business cards, but really you're just trying to make it through the awkward small talk long enough to earn a glass of free wine. I almost didn't go. I'd had a hellish day at work, and all I really wanted was to go home, order takeout, and binge some mindless reality show. But my friend had been so insistent, and somehow, there I was, standing near the balcony, looking out at the city's skyline, wondering how quickly I could leave without seeming rude. That's when he approached me. Jonah wasn't flashy or loud. He wasn't the type of guy who commanded the room. But there was something about his presence, calm, warm, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He made some comment about the hors d'oeuvres being suspiciously tiny, and it made me laugh. A real laugh, the kind that bubbles up before you can stop it. And just like that, I felt the tension of my day start to melt. We started talking. At first, it was the usual small talk, work, where we were from, what brought us to the city. But it didn't feel forced. Jonah had this way of listening that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to speak. That night, we ended up ignoring the rest of the event entirely. We sat on that balcony until the sun had set and the city lights twinkled beneath us like fallen stars. I remember thinking it felt like we'd carved out this quiet little world just for the two of us. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast, but it didn't feel rushed. We were both adventurous in our own ways. He loved hiking and camping. I was more into trying new foods and art exhibits, but we found this sweet middle ground where our worlds blended. We'd go on long hikes and reward ourselves with late-night ramen downtown. We'd spend lazy Sundays trying to outdo each other making the perfect pancake. There was a lightness to being with him, this feeling that life was just easier when we were together. I remember one night in particular. We were lying on a blanket in the park, watching some outdoor movie screening. I don't even remember what film it was. What I do remember is the way he turned to look at me, his face half lit by the flickering screen, and said, "I feel like I've known you forever." And I felt it too. That sense of familiarity, of comfort that usually takes years to build, was just there between us. It felt like magic. Of course, like any couple, we had our serious talks early on. It wasn't all fun dates and cozy nights. Maybe it was because we connected so easily that we didn't shy away from deeper conversations. I appreciated that about him. He was honest, sometimes painfully so. One night, maybe 2 months into dating, we were walking along the river after dinner. The city lights shimmered on the water, and it was one of those moments that felt almost cinematic. That's when he opened up about his past, about his parents' ugly divorce when he was 8. How it turned his world upside down. How he remembered the shouting, the slammed doors, the nights he cried himself to sleep listening to them argue in the next room. Then, he told me about his older brother's marriage that fell apart in the worst way, custody battles, betrayal, heartbreak that left his brother barely functioning. It was raw, and I could see how much it still haunted him. He looked at me with this quiet resolve and said, "I just don't believe in marriage. I don't think it brings anything good. It ruins people. I don't ever want that for myself." In that moment, I remember feeling this pang in my heart. Not because I was upset at what he said, but because I could feel his pain so clearly. I reached for his hand and squeezed it, wanting to take away even a fraction of that hurt. And honestly, at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. I was 23. Marriage wasn't even on my radar in any serious way. I was just happy we'd found each other, and I didn't want anything to complicate that. I thought, we have time. People change. Feelings change. And maybe, just maybe, once he saw how strong we were, once he saw that love didn't have to end in disaster, he'd feel differently. So I nodded and told him I understood. And I meant it. Because in that moment, I really believed love could be enough. I believed that what we were building was bigger than a label or a legal document. I believed that he'd see that too, in time. What followed was one of the happiest stretches of my life. We built routines that felt effortless, coffee runs in the morning, shared playlists on long drives, silly inside jokes that made no sense to anyone but us. I'd catch him watching me sometimes with this soft look on his face, like he couldn't believe I was real, and it made my heart swell every single time. There were times, of course, when a friend would announce an engagement or I'd get a wedding invitation in the mail. I'd feel that flicker inside, will that ever be me? But I'd push it down, reminding myself that what we had was solid, real, and more meaningful than any ring or ceremony. So, if you like the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more interesting life stories. Looking back now, I wonder if I ignored the signs too easily. If I convinced myself that love alone would bridge that gap between us. But at the start, all I saw was him, and all I felt was how right it seemed to be with him. It was easy to believe that the future would sort itself out, that we were writing a love story that could withstand anything. In those early days, I didn't see the storm coming. I didn't feel the weight of the things left unspoken, or the future we weren't truly planning together. All I saw was the boy who made me laugh when I least expected it, who held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I thought that would be enough. But of course, as I'd come to learn, sometimes love isn't about how things begin. It's about whether two hearts can truly beat together through all the hard parts, all the differences, all the hopes and fears. And that's where our story, so full of promise at the start, began to show its cracks. When I think back on the conversations Jonah and I had in the early days, I realize how much of his past shaped who he was, and how blind I was to just how deeply it ran. At first, his stories felt like something he had survived, something that had made him stronger. But over time, I began to see that they weren't just stories from his past. They were walls he'd built around his heart, and I didn't understand then how impossible it would be to break through them. I remember the first time he really opened up about his family. It was one of those nights that start out perfect, the kind that makes you feel like nothing could go wrong. We had gone out for dinner at this tiny Italian place he loved, dim lighting, candles flickering on the table, the kind of atmosphere that makes you feel like you're in your own little world. Afterward, we walked along the river, the air cool but not cold, the city lights reflecting off the water in a way that made everything feel a little magical. We'd been dating for about 2 months, still in that sweet spot where everything feels new and exciting, where you want to know everything about each other. I asked him about his family, not because I wanted to pry, but because up until that point, he hadn't shared much. I knew he had an older brother. I knew his parents didn't live in the same city anymore. But I didn't know the details, and I wanted to understand him better. He was quiet at first. I could tell he was thinking about how much he wanted to say. Then he took a deep breath, like he was bracing himself, and started to talk. His parents' divorce happened when he was 8. He said it like it was just a fact, like saying it out loud didn't cost him anything. But as he kept talking, I saw the weight of it in his eyes. His mom and dad had what he called a slow burn disaster, years of resentment, and fighting that built up until one day his dad packed a bag and walked out. Jonah said he could still remember the sound of the door slamming, the way the house felt emptier in an instant. After that, things got worse. His parents didn't just separate, they went to war. He described nights of hearing them argue over the phone, his mom crying in the kitchen, his dad yelling on the other end. Holidays became battlefields. Birthdays were awkward because one parent always seemed to ruin it by showing up late or not at all. And in the middle of it all was Jonah, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good kid who didn't cause any more trouble. He told me about how his mom leaned on him too much, confided in him like he was an adult, even though he was just a little boy. How he felt like he had to be strong for her when all he really wanted was for someone to be strong for him. How he learned early that love could turn ugly, that promises could be broken, that the people who were supposed to protect you could be the ones who hurt you the most. Then he talked about his brother, Adam. Adam was 7 years older, and Jonah had always looked up to him. When Adam got married, Jonah was in high school. At first, it seemed like a good thing. Adam seemed happy, and for a little while, their family felt like maybe it was healing. But then it all fell apart. Adam's marriage lasted for years. For years of what Jonah called slowly dying inside. He said it started small, little fights, misunderstandings. But it turned into bitterness, betrayal, and finally, a custody battle that drained Adam of everything he had. Jonah was in college at the time, and he said he'd come home for breaks and barely recognize his brother. Adam, who used to be so full of life, looked like a shell. Thin, tired, broken in ways Jonah couldn't fix. What haunted Jonah most, I think, was how much Adam's son suffered through it. Jonah adored his nephew, but he saw firsthand what the back and forth between parents did to a kid. He said it was like watching his own childhood play out all over again, but worse because this time, he felt powerless to do anything about it. When Jonah finished telling me all of this, we'd stopped walking. We were standing there on the path by the river, the sounds of the city humming softly in the background, and I didn't know what to say at first. I just reached for his hand, and he let me hold it, his fingers cold in mine. Then he said it, the words that would echo in my mind so many times later. I made a promise to myself after Adam's divorce. I'll never get married. I don't believe in it. I don't think it's worth the pain. He said it quietly, like it wasn't meant to be dramatic, just the truth as he saw it. And I nodded, because what else could I do? I could see how deeply he meant it, how much those experiences had shaped him. I wasn't going to argue with him, or try to convince him otherwise. In that moment, I just wanted to be there for him. I told myself that it didn't matter. I told myself that I didn't need marriage either, not then, not at 23, when the future still felt so far away. What mattered was how we felt about each other, not what label we put on it. I believed that. Or maybe I wanted to believe it because I didn't want anything to ruin what we had. Looking back, I can see how I softened the edges of his words in my mind. How I let hope creep in even though he'd been so clear. I thought he just needs time. I thought when he sees how good we are together, when he sees that love doesn't have to end in disaster, maybe he'll change his mind. I didn't think he was wrong to feel the way he did. How could I? He'd been through hell, and he'd seen the people he loved most get destroyed by the thing I was supposed to ask him to believe in. But deep down, I think a part of me believed that what we had was different. That we were different. That somehow, our love would be enough to heal those old wounds. I didn't say that out loud, not then. I didn't want to pressure him, or make him feel like I was trying to fix him. But I carried that hope with me, quietly, like a secret I didn't even admit to myself. For a long time, it was easy to keep that hope alive. Our relationship was strong. We laughed together, supported each other, built a life that felt full and happy. There was no reason to push for more, no need to rock the boat. I told myself we were committed, even if we didn't have a ring or a marriage certificate to prove it. And I believed that mattered more. But as the years went on, and as the people around us started getting engaged and married, I started to feel that hope flicker. Not because I loved him any less, but because I started to realize that maybe he wasn't just scared of marriage. Maybe he was scared of the kind of commitment that came with building a future together in that way. Maybe, no matter how much I loved him, that fear was bigger than us. I never doubted that he cared for me. Jonah was good to me in 1,000 ways. But when it came to that part of himself, the part that had been hurt so deeply by his family's failures, I started to see that I couldn't reach him there. And as much as I wanted to believe that time, love, and patience would be enough, the truth was beginning to feel heavier with every passing day. He'd made a promise to himself long before he met me. And I think, in his heart, he always knew he'd keep it, no matter what. When I look back at the years Jonah and I spent building our life together, it's hard not to feel a bittersweet ache. There was so much good between us, so much that felt real and steady, like a foundation I could stand on. Even with that quiet question always lingering at the edges of my mind, will this be enough? The day-to-day we shared gave me a kind of peace I hadn't known before. And for a long time, that was enough to silence the doubts. After about a year of dating, we decided to move in together. It wasn't something we rushed into. If anything, Jonah was cautious about it, probably more so than I was. He wanted to make sure we were ready, that we weren't doing it just out of convenience. And that's one of the things I appreciated so much about him. He was intentional. He didn't take decisions lightly. When he chose to share his space with me, I knew it was because he truly wanted to, not because it was the next expected step. We found this little apartment in Capitol Hill, not far from where we'd first met. It wasn't anything fancy, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a leaky faucet in the kitchen that drove us both nuts, but it was ours. We spent weekends making it feel like home, picking out curtains, hanging art on the walls, arguing, in that playful, easy way, over whether we needed throw pillows for the couch. Jonah built us a bookshelf from scratch because he said store-bought ones were a rip-off, and I filled it with novels and cookbooks and random knickknacks that made us both smile. It wasn't just about sharing a physical space. We built routines together that became the rhythm of our life. Mornings where he'd make coffee while I packed my lunch. Evenings where we'd cook side by side, music playing in the background, sometimes jazz, sometimes 90s pop, depending on whose turn it was to pick. Sundays became our day for groceries and cleaning and lazy afternoons on the couch. I'd curl up with a book while he worked on some project at the dining table, and it felt easy. It felt right. We learned how to navigate the give and take of sharing responsibilities. Jonah was better at budgeting. I was better at planning meals. He hated dealing with the landlord, so I handled that. I was awful at remembering to take out the trash, so he picked up that chore without complaint. We didn't keep score. We didn't need to. We were a team, and it felt like we were always pulling in the same direction. Vacations were where our differences sometimes showed, but even that became part of the adventure. Jonah loved the outdoors, camping, hiking, sleeping under the stars. I was more of a hotel and city tour kind of girl, but we found ways to blend our styles. A long weekend in Moab where we camped for 2 nights and then treated ourselves to a fancy inn. A trip to San Francisco where we spent a day hiking in Muir Woods before indulging in seafood on the pier. We learned to compromise, and honestly, I think those trips brought us closer. We saw each other at our best and worst, me, grumpy and sunburned after a too long hike, him, frustrated after getting us lost on the BART, and we loved each other through it all. There were tough times, of course. No relationship is perfect, and ours was no exception. Jonah lost his job once, after his company downsized. I remember coming home to find him sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, that look of defeat in his eyes. My heart broke for him. But we faced it together. We tightened our budget, cut back on extras, supported each other through the stress. And when I went through a rough patch at work, doubting myself, overwhelmed by expectations, he was my rock. He'd make me tea, listen to me vent, remind me that I was stronger than I felt. In those moments, it didn't matter that we weren't married. We were partners in every sense of the word. We had each other's backs. We built a life that felt solid and safe. And for a long time, that was enough to quiet the part of me that sometimes wondered what the future looked like. Jonah made me feel secure in ways that went beyond titles or paperwork. He showed up for me, again and again. When my mom had surgery and I was a nervous wreck, he took time off work to be with me at the hospital. When my car broke down in the middle of nowhere, he drove 2 hours to come get me without hesitation. He was dependable. He was kind. And he loved me not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the steady, quiet ways that truly mattered. We respected each other deeply. We talked through disagreements instead of letting them fester. We gave each other space when we needed it and leaned in when it counted. There was no one else I wanted to come home to, no one else I wanted to share my days with. And in those moments, it was easy to believe that marriage was just a formality. That what we had was real and strong and enough. There were times, of course, when that little voice inside me would speak up, at weddings we attended, when friends posted engagement photos, when I caught a glimpse of a bride and groom beaming at each other on the street. I'd feel that flicker of longing, that wondering. But I'd remind myself that love isn't about what the world sees. It's about what you build together day by day. And what Jonah and I had felt more real than anything I'd seen in a wedding album or on social media. We had inside jokes no one else would get. We had traditions that were ours alone, like making pancakes together on the first snow of the year, or leaving each other notes in unexpected places. We had a history of shared moments, big and small, that wove our lives together in a way that felt unshakable. So, I let myself believe that we didn't need marriage. That we were already living the commitment people chase with vows and ceremonies. That what we had was enough. And for a long time, it truly felt that way. But looking back, I can see how I was also quietly hoping that maybe, someday, he'd see it differently. That maybe, as our life together kept unfolding, he'd want to make that promise, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to. I didn't talk about it, didn't push, didn't want to ruin what felt so good. But the hope was there, tucked away in a quiet corner of my heart, waiting. And for a while, I could convince myself that hope was all I needed. Because everything else, the love, the partnership, the life we were building together, felt so solid, so real, so worth holding on to. I never thought watching other people fall in love and commit to each other would make me feel so conflicted. For the longest time, I was content with what Jonah and I had. It felt solid, safe, and real in ways I didn't think I needed to define with rings or vows. But then, like these things always do, life started to shift around us in small, almost invisible ways at first, until it became impossible to ignore. It started slowly. A college friend of mine posted her engagement photos on Instagram, one of those sunset beach shoots where everything looked perfect and effortless, like it belonged in a magazine. I remember seeing it and smiling, genuinely happy for her. But then I felt that little twinge. That soft, unexpected ache. I scrolled through the comments, the outpouring of congratulations, and I realized I'd started imagining what people would say if it were Jonah and me. The thought surprised me. I shook it off. You don't need that, I told myself. What you have is enough. But it kept happening. Friends started sharing their news. At first, it was people we weren't that close to, old classmates, coworkers. But then it was people in our circle. My roommate from college, who'd always joked about never settling down. Jonah's hiking buddy, the one I thought would be single forever because he seemed to love his freedom too much. Suddenly, it felt like everywhere I turned, someone was getting engaged, planning a wedding, or sharing photos from their honeymoon. I told myself it was just that time of life. We were in that season, the one where people started building families and buying houses. And for a while, I was able to keep that perspective. But it got harder as the months went by. I started to feel like we were standing still while the world moved on around us. And that stillness, which used to feel comfortable, started to feel like uncertainty. I didn't want to feel that way. I didn't want to compare myself, our relationship, to anyone else's. But it became harder to ignore the questions creeping into my mind. Where were we headed? What were we building? Was I fooling myself into thinking we were on the same path, or were we just parked here with no destination in sight? It wasn't like I suddenly wanted a wedding. It wasn't about the dress, or the flowers, or the party. What I wanted was the promise. The shared understanding that we were in this together. Not just now, but always. I wanted to feel like we were moving towards something, not just coasting on what we'd built so far. It started slipping into conversation in these small, almost careless ways. I'd say things like, "Isn't it wild how everyone's getting married lately?" Or, "I feel like my entire feed is engagement rings and wedding hashtags." I wasn't trying to drop hints, not at first. It was more like I was testing the waters, trying to see if he felt the same shift I did. Jonah's reactions were always the same. A small smile, maybe a chuckle. "Yeah, guess it's that age," he'd say. Or, "Funny how people rush into things." He'd say it lightly, not mean-spirited, just matter of fact. And then, almost without fail, he'd change the subject. Ask if I wanted more coffee, suggest we watch a movie, start telling me a story from his day. I don't think he did it on purpose to shut me down. I think it was instinct, the same instinct that made him shy away from anything that felt like pressure or expectation. At first, I let it go. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that he was just being Jonah. The man who didn't believe in marriage, the man who'd been honest about that from the start. But the more it happened, the more I felt that familiar ache. Because I wasn't asking him for anything, not really, not yet. I was just trying to talk, to share what I was feeling. And every time he deflected, it felt a little like he was putting up a wall between us, a wall I hadn't noticed before. I tried to reason with myself. I reminded myself of all the ways he showed his love. The way he'd bring me my favorite tea when I was sick. The way he'd squeeze my hand during movies when something made me emotional. The way he always made sure my car was safe before I went on a trip. Weren't those things more meaningful than a ring or a piece of paper? Weren't they the proof that he was committed, even if he never said the words? But late at night, when the house was quiet and my thoughts were loud, I'd find myself wondering, was he committed to us, or was he just comfortable? Was I enough, or was I convenient? I hated myself for thinking that. Because Jonah wasn't that kind of man. He wasn't careless with my heart. He wasn't the type to stay just because it was easy. But still, the questions wouldn't go away. There was one evening that stands out in my memory. We were at a friend's engagement party, surrounded by laughter and champagne and promises of forever. I watched Jonah from across the room, talking to someone, and I felt this wave of longing so strong it nearly knocked the breath out of me. I wasn't longing for the party or the ring. I was longing for the certainty I saw in those couples around us. The sense that they had chosen each other, openly, fully, with no hesitation. On the drive home, I said it again, lightly, like I didn't really care. It feels like everyone's pairing off, I said, staring out the window at the city lights. He glanced at me, smiled that easy smile of his, and said, "Yeah, guess they are." And then he started talking about the new hiking trail he wanted to try that weekend. I nodded, smiled, tried to match his lightness. But inside, I felt a little hollow. Like I tried to open a door between us and found it locked. I didn't want to push. I didn't want to be that person, the one who turns love into a list of demands. But I started to feel like we were living in different stories, like I was hoping for a chapter he didn't even believe in. Still, I held on to the hope. I told myself that what we had was enough, that maybe I just needed to let go of the idea of marriage altogether. That maybe, if I loved him enough, I could learn to stop wanting more. Because what we had was good. It was solid. It was real. But deep down, I knew. I knew that wanting stability, wanting a future I could see clearly, wasn't asking for too much. It was human. It was honest. And the more I tried to quiet that part of myself, the louder it became. And slowly, quietly, that hope I'd carried began to feel a little heavier. It had been a while since Jonah and I had gone to a big family dinner together. My parents didn't live far, just a couple of hours away in a quiet suburb where I grew up, but between work, life, and our own routines, visits were more occasional than regular. Still, when my mom called and suggested we come over for a Sunday dinner, I felt a little tug of guilt and agreed. There was no reason not to. Besides, I always liked when Jonah was with me for things like that. He had a way of putting people at ease, and my parents genuinely liked him. My mom would always light up when he walked in the door, and my dad respected his quiet, thoughtful nature. The dinner itself was what you'd expect. My mom made too much food, as always roast chicken, mashed potatoes, some kind of salad with cranberries that she insisted we all try. My younger brother was there too, teasing me about how I never came home anymore. It was cozy, familiar, one of those nights that made me feel like the world was simple for a little while. Jonah was wonderful as he always was at these things. He helped my mom carry dishes to the table, laughed at my brother's dumb jokes, and even offered to carve the chicken, despite the fact that I knew he hated being the center of attention. My parents looked at him like he was part of the family, and in so many ways, he was. After dinner, we all lingered at the table, picking at the leftovers and talking about nothing in particular. I remember feeling so content in that moment, like maybe all the questions that had been swirling in my mind about our future didn't matter. Like maybe this, right here, was enough. It wasn't until we were gathering our things to leave that it happened. My dad pulled Jonah aside. It was subtle, just a quiet, "Hey Jonah, can I have a word before you go?" I was in the kitchen helping my mom put food away, so I didn't see where they went or hear what was said. But I felt a flicker of unease. My dad wasn't the kind of person to pull people aside lightly. He was a man of few words, and when he spoke, it was usually because he had something important to say. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling. Jonah was quieter than usual, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused on the road. I kept glancing at him, waiting for him to say something, but he didn't. The silence felt heavier than normal, though he didn't seem upset. Just thoughtful. Maybe a little distant. Finally, I asked, as casually as I could, "What did my dad want to talk to you about?" Jonah hesitated. I could see him debating whether to tell me. Then he sighed, not in frustration, but like he knew it couldn't be avoided. He asked if I was serious about you. Said if I am, I should think about stepping up. I felt my stomach twist, not because I was angry at my dad, but because I hadn't seen it coming. I hadn't asked him to do that. I hadn't hinted at it, hadn't complained about Jonah or our situation to my family. Or at least, I didn't think I had. Maybe my dad had just sensed it. Maybe parents always do. I felt my cheeks flush, part embarrassment, part guilt. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know he was going to do that, I said softly, glancing at Jonah. I didn't ask him to. I know, Jonah said, his voice gentle. And I believed him. He wasn't angry with me. But I could feel the shift between us. Something unspoken had been put into words, and we couldn't unhear it now. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the evening over and over in my mind. I thought about my dad's words, the intention behind them. He loved me. He wanted me to be happy. And in his world, his generation, stepping up meant marriage. It meant security. It meant a man making a clear promise. He wasn't trying to pressure Jonah to do something he didn't want to do. He was trying to protect me in the only way he knew how. But it complicated everything. I'd worked so hard to balance my own desires with respect for Jonah's boundaries. I'd tried to be patient, to trust that what we had was strong enough without needing that next step. Now, suddenly, it felt like the quiet hope I'd been keeping to myself had been exposed, dragged out into the open where it couldn't be ignored. And it wasn't just Jonah who felt that shift. I felt it too. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much pressure I was carrying, not just from my family, but from myself. I wanted to honor Jonah's feelings, his fears, the promises he'd made to himself after watching his family fall apart. But I also wanted to honor my own. I wanted stability. I wanted a future I could see clearly, one we planned together, not just drifted into. Over the next few days, I noticed the tension in small ways. Jonah wasn't cold or distant, but he was quieter, more thoughtful. I could tell he was wrestling with what had been said, turning it over in his mind. And I was too. I found myself questioning everything. Was I being unfair to him by wanting more? Was I asking him to become someone he couldn't be? Or was I finally being honest with myself about what I needed? It felt like I was caught between two worlds. On one side was the love I had for Jonah, the life we'd built together, the happiness we shared. On the other was this growing awareness that maybe, just maybe, I wanted something different, something he couldn't give me. And I hated that. I hated feeling like my love for him wasn't enough to quiet that longing. My parents didn't bring it up again. Not directly, anyway. But I could feel it in the way my mom asked careful questions about how we were doing. In the way my dad looked at me, like he was waiting for me to say something, to open up about what was really going on. They didn't push, but the expectation was there, hanging in the air every time we talked. I tried to talk myself down from it, to remind myself that I didn't need marriage to feel secure. That Jonah showed his commitment every day in 1,000 little ways. But the seed had been planted. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it grew. I felt guilty, too. Guilty for wanting something that I knew scared him. Guilty for feeling like I was betraying his trust by hoping he might change. And guilty for feeling, deep down, that maybe I deserved that promise. That maybe it wasn't wrong to want someone to choose me openly, fully, with no hesitation. I kept trying to find the balance between loving him for who he was and being honest about what I needed. Between respecting his boundaries and not losing myself in the process. But the truth is, once that conversation happened, once the question was out there, we couldn't go back. We couldn't unhear it, unfeel it. And as much as I tried to pretend otherwise, I knew that everything had changed. I think I always knew that the conversation was coming. Maybe not the exact day or the exact words I'd use, but in my heart, I felt it building like a tide creeping higher with each passing week, until finally, it would have to break. It wasn't just because of what my dad had said, though that planted a seed that wouldn't stop growing. It was because of the way I started to feel when I looked at Jonah, when I looked at us. As much as I loved him, and I truly did, I couldn't shake the sense that we were standing at a crossroads, and pretending otherwise wouldn't change the fact that we needed to choose a path. It wasn't easy to get to that point. I agonized over it. I spent so many nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling while Jonah slept beside me, trying to figure out what I wanted to say. I'd turn the words over in my head, testing them out like fragile glass, afraid that if I handled them wrong, they'd shatter. I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to make him feel cornered, or like I was giving him some kind of ultimatum. But I also couldn't keep pretending that I didn't care. Because I did. I cared so much it hurt. The day I decided to finally bring it up wasn't planned. I hadn't circled it on the calendar or practiced my speech in the mirror. It was a Saturday. We'd spent the day doing nothing remarkable: laundry, grocery shopping, cleaning up the apartment. It was one of those quiet, ordinary days that had always felt comforting to me, the kind of day that reminded me how easy it was to share my life with him. But somehow, that's what made it harder. Because as much as I loved the life we'd built, I couldn't keep pretending I didn't want to know where it was going. That night, we were sitting on the couch, the TV on, but neither of us really watching. Jonah had his arm around me, and I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, feel the warmth of him next to me. And that's when I felt it, that overwhelming mix of love and fear and longing. I realized that I couldn't keep carrying it alone. I had to say something. I turned off the TV, and Jonah looked at me, a little surprised. I think he could sense that something was coming. His expression shifted, that easy, relaxed look giving way to something more cautious, like he was bracing for impact. I need to talk to you about something, I said, my voice soft but steady. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want this to feel like an attack. I just wanted it to be honest. Jonah didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on mine, waiting. I took a breath, trying to find the right words. I love you, I began, because that was the most important thing. I needed him to know that, to feel that. I love our life together. I love the home we've made, the way we support each other, the way you make me feel safe and seen. I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. He gave me a small smile, like he appreciated hearing it, but there was a tension in his shoulders now, a tightness in his jaw that told me he knew what was coming next. But I said, and I hated that word even as it left my mouth, I need to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot about us, about the future. And I'm struggling, Jonah. I'm struggling because I know how you feel about marriage, and I've tried so hard to respect that. I really have. But I can't pretend anymore that it doesn't matter to me. He looked away then, his gaze dropping to his hands resting on his knees. I could see the way his fingers laced together, knuckles white from the pressure. I kept going, my voice trembling a little now, but I didn't want to stop. I'm not asking for a wedding tomorrow. I'm not asking for a ring or a plan or anything like that right now. I need to know if you can see it someday. If you can see a future where we make that promise to each other. Because I want that with you. I want a life that we choose together, fully, openly. And I need to know if that's something you can ever want too. For a moment, there was only silence between us. The kind of silence that feels thick, heavy, like it's pressing down on your chest. I waited, my heart in my throat, hoping that this would be the moment we bridged the gap. That he'd take my hand, look me in the eye, and tell me he could see it, too. That we'd figure it out together, that this conversation would bring us closer, not pull us apart. But when Jonah finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hollow. Cass, I don't know what you want me to say. I felt my stomach drop. I tried to keep my voice steady, gentle. I just want you to be honest. He nodded, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew so well, a sign he was overwhelmed, searching for the right words. I am being honest. I meant it when I said I don't believe in marriage. I meant it when I said I don't think it's for me. I'm happy with what we have. I thought you were, too. I am, I said, and I meant it. But I'm also scared. Because I feel like we're on different pages, and I don't know how to reconcile that. I don't want to force you into something you don't believe in. But I also can't keep pretending I don't want it. He sighed, and the sound of it broke my heart a little. I don't want to hurt you, he said. I love you. You're everything to me. But when I think about marriage, all I see is pain. All I see is the wreckage it left behind in my family. I don't want that for us. I don't want to mess up what we have. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it, but it felt different, like he was holding on out of habit, not because he wanted to. I don't think marriage would mess us up, I whispered. I think it would mean we're choosing each other, no matter what comes. He shook his head, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite name. It's not about you. It's not about us. It's about me. I can't change how I feel about it. I wish I could, but I can't. The distance between us felt like a chasm then, one I didn't know how to cross. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we'd figure it out, that love would be enough. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was true. We sat there in silence for a long time, our hands still joined, but our hearts feeling so far apart. And in that quiet, I realized that this wasn't the talk that would bring us closer. It was the talk that showed me how far apart we already were. That night, as we got ready for bed, everything felt fragile. Like if I spoke again, if I pushed even a little more, everything would break. So I didn't. I lay beside him in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had just passed between us. I loved him. God, I loved him. But I didn't know if that love was enough to bridge the gap between what I needed and what he could give. And for the first time, I felt truly, deeply unsure of where we were headed. I always thought that if Jonah and I were ever going to end, I would see it coming. I believed that after everything we'd been through, the years we'd spent building a life together, the conversations, the love, we would know if we were heading toward that kind of ending. That there would be signs, or at least a slow unraveling. But when it happened, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like the ground dropped out from under me in an instant. One moment we were us, and the next we weren't. And I was left standing there, trying to understand how I hadn't seen it coming. It was a Tuesday night. Nothing special about it. We'd both had long days at work, and we were tired. I remember what we ate for dinner, leftover pasta I'd reheated while Jonah checked emails on his phone. It was one of those quiet evenings where everything feels routine and safe. I didn't know that by the end of it, everything would be different. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, like we often did, the soft hum of the TV filling the space between us. I could tell Jonah was distracted, his gaze flicking to the screen, but not really seeing it. I figured he was stressed about something at work. I almost asked, but something in his posture kept me quiet. There was a tension in him that I couldn't name, and suddenly I felt nervous, without knowing why. And then, so quietly, so unexpectedly, he said it. Cass, I think we need to talk. I turned toward him, heart already beating faster. I could hear it in his voice. The weight behind those words. The finality of it. But I still didn't think this was where it was headed. I thought maybe he wanted to revisit our conversation about marriage, that maybe he'd been thinking about it, that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to meet me halfway. Hope flared in me for a split second. But then I saw his face, and that hope died before it could fully take shape. His eyes were sad and tired, and there was something else there too, something that looked like resolve. He took a deep breath, and the next words out of his mouth felt like they knocked the air right out of me. I think we should end this. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. My brain felt like it couldn't process what he'd just said. My first reaction was confusion, pure and simple. What? That was the only word that echoed through me. What is happening right now? I stared at him, searching his face for some clue, some hint that this wasn't real. That he didn't mean it. That he was angry or upset or saying something he didn't mean because he was hurt or scared. But no, he was calm. Too calm. His voice was steady, his expression gentle but firm. Why? I finally managed to whisper, my throat tight, my heart racing. Why are you doing this? Jonah sighed, and it was the kind of sigh that told me he'd been carrying this decision for a while. That this wasn't sudden for him, even if it felt like it came out of nowhere for me. Because I love you, and I don't want to hurt you anymore, he said. His voice cracked just a little at the word love, and that nearly broke me. Because I know what you want, what you need, and I can't give it to you. And it's not fair to keep pretending I can. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes, my hands gripping the edge of the couch because I felt like if I didn't hold on to something, I might fall apart completely. But we can figure it out. We can talk about it. Don't do this, Jonah. Please. Don't do this like this. I've thought about it, Cass, he said softly, and there was so much sadness in his voice. I've thought about it over and over, and I know that I can't be the man you deserve. I know that you'll stay because you love me. But you'll always be hoping I'll change. And I won't. I can't. And I don't want to watch you give up what you need just to stay with me. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shake him and tell him that wasn't true, that I would have stayed, that love was enough. But deep down, in the part of me that I hadn't wanted to listen to, I knew he was right. I was hoping he'd change. I was waiting for a future he couldn't give me. And maybe he saw it more clearly than I did. But none of that mattered in that moment, because all I could feel was heartbreak. I felt blindsided, betrayed, devastated. Because for all the ways I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that we might not want the same future, I hadn't prepared for this. For him ending it like this. For him deciding on his own, without me, that we were over. I kept thinking of all the things I should say, all the arguments I should make. That we could go to counseling. That we could take a break instead of breaking up. That we could figure it out together. But the words felt useless. Because Jonah wasn't angry. He wasn't lashing out. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was breaking up with me because he truly believed it was the kindest thing he could do. And somehow, that made it hurt even more. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He looked at me with so much sorrow in his eyes that it made me want to collapse under the weight of it. He looked at me like he wanted to take the pain away, even as he was the one causing it. And I hated that. I hated that he was trying to protect me because all I wanted was for him to fight for us instead. I don't want this, I said, my voice shaking, tears spilling down my cheeks. Please, don't do this. I don't want it either, he said, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. But I can't keep holding you back. I can't keep being the reason you're waiting for something that's never going to come. I think that was the moment I realized it was really happening. That no matter what I said, no matter how hard I begged or reasoned, Jonah had made up his mind. And the worst part was, I couldn't even hate him for it. Because he wasn't ending things out of anger or frustration. He was ending it because he loved me enough to let me go. And somehow, that hurt more than if he'd walked out in a fit of rage. I don't remember much of the rest of that night. It's all a blur of tears and aching and the hollow, empty feeling of realizing that the future I'd imagined with him was gone. I think I tried to say more, to ask him to reconsider, but his mind was set. He was gentle, kind, heartbreakingly so. He didn't leave that night. We sat there for hours, neither of us knowing what to do with ourselves. But the decision had been made, and I knew there was no going back. Later, lying alone in bed, I replayed the moment over and over, thinking of all the things I wished I'd said differently. Maybe if I'd brought up marriage sooner. Maybe if I'd said less or more. Maybe if I'd hidden my hurt better or been more patient or less patient. Maybe if I'd been braver or softer or somehow just different. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't have mattered. Because this wasn't about what I said or didn't say. It was about who Jonah was and what he could or couldn't give. And no amount of love was going to change that. The breakup wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, gentle, final. And somehow, that made it the hardest thing I've ever gone through. Because when someone walks away out of love, there's nothing to fight against. There's just the emptiness they leave behind. The morning after Jonah ended things, I woke up to a quiet that felt unfamiliar, oppressive. The kind of quiet that fills a room when something important has been lost. I remember lying there in our bed, no, my bed now, I supposed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the night before over and over in my mind. Every word, every look, every sigh between sentences. My heart felt heavy, like it was made of stone, and at the same time, hollow in a way I couldn't explain. I kept thinking, this can't be how it ends. Not like this. I told myself to give him space. I knew Jonah. I knew how he processed things slowly, internally, turning them over in his mind until he felt certain. I wanted to respect that. But as the hours passed, the urge to reach out became too much to ignore. I told myself I wasn't trying to change his mind. I just wanted him to know where I stood. I needed him to understand that I hadn't meant to pressure him, that all I ever wanted was for us to be okay. So, I picked up my phone. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, trying to find the right words. Words that would express what I felt without sounding desperate. Words that would somehow pull us back from the edge without making him feel trapped. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly, and finally, I typed. Jonah, I'm sorry if I made you feel like I was trying to push you into something you don't want. That was never my intention. I just wanted to talk, to be honest about what I was feeling. Please don't let that ruin everything we've built. I love you. I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. The moment it was gone, I felt both relief and dread. Relief because I'd said what was in my heart. Dread because I didn't know how he'd respond, or if he'd respond at all. Hours passed. My phone stayed silent. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I sent another message. Shorter this time, less composed, more raw. Please, Jonah, can we just talk? I don't want this to be how it ends. Again, nothing. I tried calling once, my thumb hovering over the end call button almost as soon as it started ringing. When it went to voicemail, I hung up before leaving a message. I didn't trust my voice not to crack, didn't want him to hear how broken I sounded. That night was one of the longest of my life. I kept checking my phone, hoping to see his name light up the screen. Every time it didn't, the ache in my chest grew deeper. I kept thinking, if he could just hear me out, if we could just talk, we could find a way through this. But all I had was silence. And that silence spoke louder than any words. The next day, I sent one final text. I didn't want to bombard him. I didn't want to become someone who begged or pleaded. But I could not say this. I understand if you need time. I just want you to know I'm here whenever you're ready. I love you. That hasn't changed. That message sat there, unread or ignored, I didn't know which. Either way, it felt like the final thread snapping. I didn't tell anyone right away. Part of me felt too raw, too exposed. Like saying it out loud would make it more real. But after a couple of days, when the silence had grown too heavy to bear alone, I called my best friend, Lena. She knew something was wrong the moment she heard my voice. What's going on? She asked, her tone shifting from casual to concerned in an instant. And then it all came spilling out. The talk about marriage, the breakup, the texts I'd sent, the silence that followed. I told her everything, my voice cracking in places, the tears I'd been trying to hold back finally breaking through. Oh, Cass, she said when I finally paused to breathe. I'm so sorry. I could hear the sympathy in her voice, but also the restraint. I knew Lena well enough to know she was holding back what she probably wanted to say. Things like you deserve better, or I never thought he'd do this to you. And I appreciated her for that. I didn't need judgments or anger. I just needed someone to listen. Do you think I did the wrong thing? I asked her, hating how small my voice sounded. By bringing it up, I mean, by wanting more. No, she said firmly. No, Cass. You were honest about what you wanted. That's not wrong. That's never wrong. And if he couldn't handle that, well, that says more about him than it does about you. I wanted to believe her. I tried to, but in those first few days, all I could think about was what I could have done differently. Should I have waited longer? Should I have kept my feelings to myself? Should I have pretended that what we had was enough, even when it wasn't anymore? I hated myself for doubting, but I couldn't help it. Heartbreak has a way of making you question everything, even your own truths. Talking to my mom was harder. When she called to check in, as she often did, I tried to sound normal, but she heard it immediately, the strain in my voice, the effort it took to hold myself together. What's wrong, sweetheart? She asked gently. And again, it came pouring out. She listened quietly, only interrupting to murmur comfort or ask a soft question. When I was done, there was a long pause on her end. I'm so sorry, honey, she said finally. I know how much you loved him. And I know how hard you tried. But maybe this was always going to happen. Maybe he just wasn't capable of giving you what you deserve. I didn't want to hear that, not then. It felt too final, too accepting of an ending I wasn't ready to accept. But I also knew she was probably right. I just wasn't ready to face it. Over the next week, I kept hoping, despite myself. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, only to sink again when it was just a work email or a friend checking in. I kept thinking maybe Jonah just needed time. That maybe he'd realize we could work through this, that love was enough to find a way. But his silence stayed steady, and the longer it lasted, the more real the breakup became. Friends invited me out, trying to distract me, to remind me there was life beyond the heartbreak. Sometimes I went, smiled, tried to act normal. But it felt like I was watching myself from a distance, going through the motions. I missed him. I missed the way he made tea in the morning, the way his hand would find mine without thinking, the way he made the world feel safer just by being in it. And I missed the future I'd pictured for us, even if he hadn't seen it the same way. The hardest part was knowing that he hadn't ghosted me out of cruelty or indifference. He'd gone silent because he truly believed it was the right thing to do, for both of us. And in some ways, that made it so much harder to let go. Because I knew he wasn't out there hating me or blaming me. He was out there missing me too, probably, but convinced that staying apart was the kindest thing he could do. And so I tried, day by day, to accept it. To stop reaching out. To let the silence be what it was, an answer, even if it wasn't the one I wanted. But every night, when the world got quiet and I was left alone with my thoughts, I'd still find myself staring at my phone, hoping. Just for a moment. Just for a sign that we weren't really over. Even though, deep down, I knew we were. The days that followed were a blur. It's hard to explain the kind of emptiness that settles in after the end of a relationship, especially one that felt like it was part of your bones. It wasn't just that Jonah was gone from my life. It was that everything I thought I knew about my future had disappeared in the span of a single night. I felt unmoored, like I was floating through my days without any real sense of purpose or direction. I stopped sleeping. Nights stretched out endlessly, with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and my thoughts racing faster than I could keep up. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation Jonah and I ever had, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things began to slip away. When did we start drifting in different directions? When did I stop being enough for him, or him for me? Some nights, I'd find myself reaching out toward his side of the bed, my hand landing on nothing but cool sheets. The absence of him felt physical, like a hollow space I couldn't fill. I'd curl into myself, trying to hold the pieces together, telling myself to just get through the night. That maybe tomorrow would hurt a little less. But it didn't. Not for a long time. During the day, I went through the motions. I got up, showered, went to work. I smiled at coworkers when they passed by, answered emails, sat in meetings. But I wasn't really there. My mind was always somewhere else, lost in the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. I kept wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have never brought up marriage? Should I have hidden my feelings and just been grateful for what we had? Should I have been stronger, braver, more patient? The questions circled endlessly, each one more painful than the last. And yet, beneath the guilt and the self-doubt, there was another voice. A quieter voice, harder to hear, but it was there. The voice that reminded me I hadn't done anything wrong by wanting more. That my needs were just as valid as Jonah's fears. But it was hard to listen to that voice when the louder one, the one filled with regret and heartbreak, kept drowning it out. I spent a lot of time trying to understand him. That was always my instinct with Jonah, to empathize, to see the world through his eyes. I knew his history. I knew the way his parents' bitter divorce had left scars on him he rarely spoke about. I knew how much it had shaken his sense of what relationships could be. And then his brother's marriage falling apart on top of that. It was like life kept reinforcing the same painful lesson for him, that marriage only leads to heartbreak. I tried to remind myself of that when the hurt felt too sharp. I tried to tell myself that his leaving wasn't because he didn't love me, but because he was too afraid of what love might become if we tried to take it further. But as much as I understood where he was coming from, as much as I wanted to honor his truth, I couldn't ignore my own. And my truth was that I wanted more. I deserved more. I wanted to build a life with someone who wanted the same things I did, who wasn't afraid to stand beside me and face the future no matter how uncertain it might be. And slowly, painfully, I began to realize that Jonah was never going to be that person, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't. There were moments when I felt angry. Angry at him for walking away. Angry at myself for not seeing it coming. Angry at the universe for bringing us together in the first place if this was how it was going to end. I'd think about all the time we'd spent together, the years, the memories, the promises whispered in the dark, and I'd feel cheated. Like I'd invested so much of myself into something that was always destined to fall apart. I hated that feeling. I hated feeling bitter. But grief has so many layers, and sometimes anger is the only thing that feels solid when everything else is falling apart. Other times, the guilt would come crashing back in. I'd think about how I might have made him feel cornered, how maybe my need for clarity and commitment had felt like pressure to him, no matter how gently I tried to bring it up. I'd think about the times he looked at me with that mix of love and fear in his eyes, and I'd wonder if I'd asked too much. If I'd failed him somehow. If I'd failed us. My friends and family tried to help. They listened, offered comfort, reminded me that I had nothing to feel guilty for. That Jonah's decision was his own, and that I couldn't have changed it, no matter how hard I tried. Sometimes I believed them. Sometimes I didn't. But I was grateful they were there. that they held space for me while I tried to figure out how to hold space for myself. I started journaling late at night when sleep wouldn't come and my thoughts felt too heavy to carry alone. I'd write down everything I was feeling, the sadness, the confusion, the longing. I'd write letters to Jonah that I never intended to send, just to get the words out of my head. I'd pour my heart onto the page, hoping that somehow, putting it into words would help me make sense of it all. It didn't always help, but at least it gave me something to do with the ache. And bit by bit, in the quiet moments between waves of grief, I started to see the truth that had been there all along. That Jonah and I had never really been on the same page. We'd loved each other deeply, yes, but we'd always been loving with different visions of what the future should look like. And love, as powerful as it is, can't always bridge that kind of gap. We wanted different things. And neither of us was wrong for that. It just meant that we weren't meant to walk the same path forever. That realization didn't make the pain go away, but it did help me begin to let go of some of the guilt. To stop blaming myself for wanting what I wanted. To stop blaming him for not being able to give it. It helped me see that sometimes, endings aren't about failure or fault. Sometimes they're just about truth. And the truth was, Jonah and I were two good people who loved each other, but who couldn't build the future we both deserved. The sadness lingered, of course. Some nights it still kept me awake. Some mornings I still woke up reaching for him before I remembered he wasn't there. But with each passing day, I tried to be a little gentler with myself. To remind myself that healing isn't linear, that it's okay to feel everything I was feeling. That heartbreak, as awful as it is also proof that we dared to love in the first place. And that, I think, is something to be proud of. The weeks after Jonah and I ended felt like walking through fog. Everything was muted, slowed down. I'd wake up each morning and for just a second, I'd forget. I'd reach across the bed like I always had, half expecting to feel his warmth beside me. But the other side was empty, and the remembering hit like a punch in the gut. The first few days, I kept thinking, maybe this is temporary. Maybe he'll change his mind. Maybe we just need space. But as the days turned to weeks and his silence remained steady, that hope started to fade. And I had to face what I'd been avoiding, that this wasn't just a pause. This was the end. Grief is strange. It doesn't move in a straight line. Some mornings, I'd wake up determined to move on, to start fresh, to remind myself that I deserved a future with someone who wanted the same things I did. And then, out of nowhere, a memory would hit, a silly inside joke, a song we both loved, the way he used to brush my hair behind my ear when I was reading, and the sadness would wash over me all over again. But slowly, as time passed, I started finding moments of clarity in the middle of that sadness. I began to see that what I was grieving wasn't just Jonah. It was the version of the future I'd built in my head. The plans we'd talked about late at night. The home we shared. The way I'd imagined our lives unfolding. Letting go of that vision felt almost harder than letting go of him. Because even though I understood why we ended, even though I could see that we wanted different things, there was still a part of me that ached for what could have been. But with each day that passed, I started to ask myself harder questions. What had I learned from all of this? What would I take with me as I tried to rebuild, to move forward? The answers didn't come easily. They came in fragments, in quiet moments when I wasn't trying so hard to figure it all out. The biggest lesson, I think, was that love, real, deep, meaningful love, isn't always enough on its own. I'd spent so long believing that if we just loved each other enough, we could overcome anything. But love, as powerful as it is, can't erase fundamental differences in what we want out of life. It can't change someone's deeply held beliefs or make their fears disappear. And it can't make two people fit together if their visions for the future don't align. That was a hard truth to face. But it was freeing, too, in a strange way. Because it helped me stop blaming myself or Jonah. I also learned about the importance of compromise and where the line is between healthy compromise and sacrificing yourself. In our relationship, I kept telling myself I could live without marriage, that what we had was enough. And for a long time, it was. But deep down, I knew I was hoping Jonah would change his mind. I was waiting, silently, for him to come around. And in doing that, I wasn't really being fair to him or to myself. Because real compromise means meeting in the middle, not quietly erasing your own needs in the hope that the other person will someday see them. There were moments, in the thick of the heartbreak, when I questioned my worth. When I wondered if I'd asked for too much. If wanting commitment, wanting that sense of security and shared promise, made me unreasonable. But with time, I came to understand that my needs were valid. That wanting marriage wasn't about wanting a ring or a party or a piece of paper. It was about wanting someone to choose me, fully and openly, in a way that felt right to me. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with walking away from someone who can't give it. As I began to rebuild my sense of self, I focused on the small things. I started filling my apartment with reminders that it was my space now, flowers on the table, new art on the walls, a different scent of candle burning at night. I leaned into the friendships that had carried me through the darkest moments. I started therapy, something I'd always thought about but never made time for before. And slowly, I began to piece together a vision of my future that wasn't tied to Jonah or to anyone else. I thought a lot about what I'd do differently if I found myself in a similar situation again. And I think the biggest thing would be listening to my own heart sooner. I would pay more attention to those quiet doubts, those little whispers that told me I wanted more, instead of pushing them aside in the name of keeping the peace. I would speak up earlier and more honestly about what I wanted and needed. And I would trust that the right person wouldn't see those needs as pressure, but as part of who I am, someone worth committing to fully. I don't know what my future holds. I don't know when or if I'll fall in love again. But I do know that next time, I'll go into it with my eyes wide open. I'll look for someone whose vision for the future matches mine. Someone who isn't afraid of commitment or of building something lasting together. And I'll remind myself that it's okay to walk away from anything that asks me to shrink myself or to wait forever for something that isn't coming. And I hope, more than anything, that Jonah finds peace too. I hope he heals those old wounds that kept him from believing in marriage in forever. Because despite everything, I want good things for him. We loved each other the best we could, for as long as we could. And now it's time for both of us to move forward, to build the lives we're meant to have. There are still moments when it hurts. When a memory sneaks up on me and catches me off guard. When I see a couple holding hands and feel that ache of longing. But those moments are becoming fewer. And when they come, I remind myself that I am stronger than I thought. That I have survived this heartbreak and I am still here, still hopeful, still open to love. Because love is worth it. Even when it ends. Even when it breaks your heart. It teaches you. It shapes you. And it reminds you what you truly deserve. And that, I think, is the most important lesson of all.